Welcome to Conversations on Caring. Today, I sit down with my friend Jessica Fein. Jessica is a mom to three, and her youngest child, Dahlia, was diagnosed with a rare mitochondrial degenerative disease called Murph syndrome. In this conversation, I talk with Jessica about what it's like to be a parent of a child with a rare disease, one that is really all-consuming. I learned that she had to have eyes on Dahlia at all times, either herself or her husband or a nurse had to be watching Dahlia at all times to make sure that she was breathing properly. And also we learn what's helpful when someone loses someone, whether that's a child or a parent or a sibling. So in this conversation, Jessica is just incredible. I know you will learn so much from her. And I invite you to take some time to really learn everything you can from Jessica. Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so here we are, this conversation on caring, and it's an opportunity for us to highlight different caregivers' experiences so that we can have a better understanding of what caring looks like in different contexts. So I would love for you to start out and tell us about your caregiving experience.
Sure. So I've had some different caregiving experiences for different members of my family, but the most profound one by far was for my daughter, Dahlia. Dahlia had an ultra rare mitochondrial disease called Murph syndrome, which is a degenerative disease. And so the caregiving really changed form and became more intense over the years. And it's really interesting because when you have children, you expect in a typical situation that the hands-on physical care of the child gets less over time, right? And when you have a child with a degenerative disease, you go in the opposite direction. So Dahlia was diagnosed when she was 5, and at first it was just a few things. She had some speech delays and she had some balance issues, which ultimately led to this diagnosis. But she didn't get very, very, very sick until she was 9. And, it's interesting. Had you asked me at 7, I probably would have said, oh, she's very, very, very sick, but just because of what came later. And at that point, she had a tracheostomy. So she had a trach and she had a G-tube. And so she was not, after that, able to eat or speak, and she became ventilator dependent. And so that is like really intense medical care that she required, in addition, of course, to all the other kinds of care we give as parents, and the emotional and psychological and all the different everything, which was only heightened in this situation. So it was quite a caregiving journey, and it was something that changed every time we thought we kind of understood what we were doing. There'd be the next thing and the next thing, because that's, of course, the nightmare of a degenerative disease. It's always changing and it's always getting worse.
Yeah. What did friends, family do that was helpful? Any actions that people did to support you and your family?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about because it was so hard for people to understand. And I don't think, unless they actually came to the house, they really understood. Because if you were, and I'm actually sitting in the room that was Dahlia's room now, but it was like a room in an intensive care unit. I mean, with the machinery. And Dahlia also, by the way, I didn't say this before, was an eyes-on patient, which meant that she needed to have myself or my husband or a nurse who was trained specifically in her care, watching her 24/7.
Oh my.
So like what that meant is if I was home alone with her, like I couldn't go to the bathroom. I would have to, bring her. We needed to be watching her. So it was very, very, very intense. And so the friends that were most helpful, or the family members, I think was when somebody would say, I see what you're going through, and I just want you to know I appreciate how hard it is, or how hard it must be, that recognition. Because at least for us, we also had jobs outside of the home, and we were raising two other children as well. And we were very active in a million different things. And so it can appear as though, okay, they've got it covered kind of thing. And so, that recognition was valuable. I also think that having an opportunity sometimes to go out with a friend, my husband and I did this thing that I think was like the most miraculous thing we could have possibly done, which is we each gave each other one night off during the week. It
Mm.
sounds so simple.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, we got the idea from a couple who had one child who was healthy, and they did it. And we were like, wait a minute, why aren't we doing that? So Tuesday nights was his night and Thursday nights was my night. And what that meant is after work, I didn't need to come home. I could do whatever I wanted. It was my night off. And so
Mm.
I'd see friends, and that was, that gave me a sense of normalcy. That gave me a way to go out and be me and not be mom, nurse, therapist, all the other things I was. So I think that was really valuable. And then I feel like some of the more practical things, when somebody shows up and says, hey, I'm going to bring dinner, that kind of thing, without being asked.
Yes.
I think a lot of the time the onus is on the caregiver to do the asking. And you know what? When you're so immersed, you don't even have the wherewithal to know what would be helpful. So when people would just take that step, that meant a lot to us as well.
Yes. And then you also have the experience of being a grieving parent. And
Yes.
in that, what did people say or do that was helpful?
So I think that for grieving people, and in many cases, it is intensified when you're a grieving parent. Sitting with people in their sadness, which is really, really, really hard for people to do, is very valuable, right? Because I know I am a fixer by nature, and I want to, think about like, well, what can I do? Like, hey, let's, cheer you up. There's no cheering to be had, right? And so I think, again, it's about recognition. It's about trying to listen to what the person might need rather than what you as the support person feel comfortable with. Right. And so I think that is a big one. Again, it's the just showing up and doing the things. I think another one is remembering. And so, for example, a few weeks ago, we had my daughter's birthday and we had the anniversary of her death. They're just a few days apart. And every person who remembered, that meant so much, whether that's, calling, sending a card. My sister died decades ago, and I have one friend, she must just have it in her calendar, but I get a card from her every year. And that means so much to me, or I think another thing is sharing stories, sharing pictures. That's a really big one, because when you lose somebody, it's like up until that day, everything you have in your storage in your mind, that's it. Like, you're not going to get the new memories. You're not going to get the new stories. You're not going to get, because it's now done. And when somebody brings you pictures or tells you stories, you get to create new memories. And that's so meaningful. And I think a lot of times we feel like, well, I don't want to bring up, the person who's passed, because I don't want to make you sad, or I don't want to remind you. And it's like, okay, I haven't forgotten. I'm thinking, if you could see my behind the computer, I probably have 20 pictures of my daughter, right? So that's what, she's here in my mind all the time. And I want to talk about her. I want to look at pictures, all those things. So I feel like that's another really valuable thing. When people say, what was she like? I'll add, I went to a conference for an organization called Global Genes. And so there were a lot of people who work in the rare disease community who are there. And I sat to have a meal with some people I didn't know. I said, my daughter, was explaining what my purpose being at this conference was. And two people said to me, out of earshot of the other, when they heard that I had a daughter who had died, what was her name? It sounds simple.
Yeah.
It was so striking to me because it
Mm.
was not what people typically say. People typically
Mhm.
say, I'm so sorry. I
Yeah.
can't imagine. Okay. That there's no response to that.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right? What was her name? It opens up. It gives me an opportunity to share, and somebody wanted to hear about her. Two people. And so that's something that I think more and more people can do when they are encountering somebody who's grieving.
That's so helpful. And in terms of when people, you say reach out and send a card, what are things people can say? Because sometimes people don't even know
Yes.
what to
People
say,
don't
right?
even know what to say. And first of all, that's okay to say, I really don't know what to say, but I'm thinking about you.
Mm.
That's fine.
Mhm.
The thing that a lot of people say that actually isn't helpful is, I can't imagine. A lot of people say that. A lot of people. I mean, we had people saying that to us at the funeral. Okay. Again, it's like, what are you as the recipient of hearing that supposed to say to that? Like, good for you that you don't have to then.
Right.
Right.
We couldn't imagine either, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we couldn't imagine either, right? And by the way, I think you could imagine, you just don't want to. I wouldn't want
Yeah.
it, right?
Right.
But it's such a common thing to say. And in
Mm.
fact, I had a lot of people say it to me even when I was a caregiver. Before, I can't imagine what this must be like, so maybe you could ask, what does it feel like? That's okay.
Mhm. Wow. So all of these experiences that you've had, how has that shaped you? I know that you're doing some tremendous things. Can you share how this has really changed your life?
Yeah, my I think my life was changed with the first major loss that I had when I was 27, when my sister died. And I think the reason that it changed so profoundly, my sister, we were 3 years apart. She was 30 when she died. We were best friends, and she died suddenly.
Mm.
And the way I describe it is like, I lived in a bit of a bubble before that, in terms of things kind of going along in a pretty conventional way. And that was a puncture to the bubble.
Mhm.
And I've seen everything since then through that puncture, that's really shaped the way I see everything. And so and then, by the way, also seeing how my parents dealt with the loss of a child when
Mm.
my sister died,
Mhm.
and then all these decades later to be in this same situation. Of course, the details couldn't be more different about the stories with my daughter and my sister, but it's changed me at every cell of my being is different. I mean, I am not the same person I was before. And that's for having had the opportunity to be Dahlia's mother. I am not the same person, not as much even as for having gone through the loss, but having watched her and learned from her. That changed me again at the cellular level. And so the
Mhm.
grace and the dignity and the joy with which Dahlia continued to greet the world, even in the most horrendous of circumstances, changed me, because I feel like if she could do that, I'm going to try to do that. And also, I feel like part of who I am now is about spreading her impact, sharing her stories. So, you said I'm doing these things now, and here's my plug for what I'm doing. But, I have my book coming out in a year, and I think it's really, these stories of her and how we got through the journey. I'm looking forward to people being able to read a little bit about that. And then my podcast, I don't know how you do it, which is actually like, a little bit using the term a little bit facetiously, of course, because people always said to me, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. And I'm like, all right, so let's talk to people whose lives seem unimaginable for whatever reason. And let's
Mhm.
find out how they do it, right? Instead of saying, I don't know how you
Yes.
do it, let's find out. So these kinds of things about people's stories and people's challenges and the brokenness of families and the way we create families, and just all of the different things we go through that we imagine we never could, and we do when we come out the other side. These are the stories and the things that are interesting to me now, and it's not something I would have thought of before. So that's another way I've been changed.
Well, I am changed because I get to be right along, like on the sidelines, getting to listen to these stories, and I read everything you put out. And I will also add that when I think of Dahlia, I think of these big wide eyes and smile whenever she heard music. Like she would light up when she heard music. That's what I think of when I think of Dahlia.
I
So
love that. And that's such a gorgeous memory. And it's so who she was.
yes, yes. Thank you so much for being here today. And when is it time to pre-order the book? Is it time? Are we ready yet?
We're not quite ready, but I'll tell you, I'll come back
Okay.
on. We'll do another
All
one of these
right.
when it's time.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.